A millionaire with a broken past, a homeless woman with a secret that could change everything. Adrian never expected to be drawn to Isla until he took her to his ex-fiancée's wedding, shattering expectations and setting off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Secrets, passion, and a love that defies the odds. This is not just a story about romance. It's a tale of transformation, where every glance, every touch, holds the power to turn their worlds upside down. Are you ready for the shock that will leave you breathless? The city skyline glittered with 1,000 lights, but Adrian Kane felt none of its warmth. He stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a crystal glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. Below him the world moved on. People laughed, cars honked, life continued. But inside him a storm brewed, one he had mastered the art of concealing. It had been a year, yet the scar remained fresh. Victoria, his ex-fiancée, the woman he had once imagined growing old with, had walked out of his life as if their love had been nothing more than an illusion. She had left him for Richard Sterling, a billionaire whose empire was vast, whose wealth eclipsed Adrian's own. Not because she loved Richard more, but because she loved power more. And now she was marrying him. Adrian clenched his jaw as he stared at the wedding invitation resting on his sleek black marble counter. The golden lettering mocked him. Victoria Montgomery and Richard Sterling cordially invite you. A scoff escaped his lips. Cordially, after what she had done. His fingers tightened around the invitation until the edges crumpled. He had spent years believing in love, in building a future, only to be discarded like an old investment that no longer yielded returns. Are you going? Adrian turned to see his best friend Daniel Hayes lounging on the couch sipping his own drink. Daniel had been with him through it all. The heartbreak, the aftermath, the nights Adrian had drowned himself in work to escape the pain. I don't know, Adrian admitted, his voice low. Daniel smirked, eyes twinkling with mischief. You should go. Why? So I can watch them exchange vows and pretend I'm happy for them? No. Daniel leaned forward. So you can show her you've moved on, that you don't need her, that you're better without her. Adrian exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dark hair. He didn't care about proving anything to Victoria, but the idea of walking in alone, looking like the jilted ex, didn't sit well either. You know what would be even better? Daniel grinned. Take someone so stunning, so confident, that she makes Victoria rethink everything. Adrian chuckled darkly. Like who? Daniel shrugged. Someone unexpected, someone who will leave people talking. Adrian dismissed the idea, but later that night, as he stepped out for some fresh air, fate intervened. The streets were alive, the hum of New York's nightlife echoing through the air. Adrian walked aimlessly, lost in thought, when a soft, melancholic melody stopped him in his tracks. His gaze shifted toward the entrance of a dimly lit restaurant. A woman sat on the cold pavement, a guitar resting on her lap, her voice weaving through the air like a bittersweet confession. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, but life had clearly not been kind to her. Her dark, wavy hair cascaded down her shoulders, tangled yet somehow effortlessly beautiful. Her clothes were worn, a little oversized, as if they had belonged to someone else before her. But it was her eyes that held him captive, a shade of blue that reminded him of the ocean just before a storm. She wasn't just singing. She was bleeding emotions through her voice. People passed by, some dropping a few dollars into the open guitar case, others barely sparing her a glance. But Adrian stood frozen, his heart inexplicably drawn to the woman who seemed to be singing directly to his soul. Who is she? As the final notes of her song faded into the night, she exhaled, looking up, and their eyes met. For a brief moment, time stilled. She stared at him, studying him with cautious curiosity, as if she were trying to decipher why a man in an expensive coat and a presence that commanded power would be standing there, watching her like she was the only thing that existed. You like sad songs, huh? She asked, breaking the silence. Her voice, even without the melody, had an undeniable allure, a mix of soft and sharp, of resilience and vulnerability. Adrian found himself smirking. Only when they sound like that. She arched an eyebrow. Is that your way of saying I should quit singing? He shook his head. That's my way of saying you should be on a stage, not a sidewalk. She laughed, a sound that held both amusement and disbelief. Yeah? You gonna make me a star? Adrian studied her for a second longer before making a decision he didn't quite understand yet. No, he said, stepping closer. But I might have a proposition for you. Her amusement faded slightly, replaced with intrigue. What kind of proposition? I need a date, he said simply. For a wedding. She blinked. You're joking. I don't joke. Her lips curled into a smirk. And what? You figured. Hey, let's pick a random homeless woman off the street and make her my Cinderella for the night. Adrian shrugged, completely unfazed. Something like that. She folded her arms, tilting her head at him. And why would I say yes? He smiled, leaning in just enough that she caught the faintest scent of his cologne, woodsy, expensive, intoxicating. Because something tells me you like surprises. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, as if deciding to see how far this madness could go, she extended her hand. Fine. I'm Isla, she said. Adrian took her hand in his, feeling the contrast between his warmth and her cold fingers. He held her gaze, the flicker of something electric passing between them. Adrian, he replied. Neither of them knew it then, but that single handshake would change both of their lives forever. The city air was crisp, laced with the scent of damp pavement and the distant aroma of street food. Isla Rivers stared at the impossibly handsome man standing before her, his piercing gaze fixed on her, like she was something more than just a homeless woman on the sidewalk. She should have laughed in his face, should have walked away. But something about him, the quiet torment in his eyes, the way he carried himself like a man who had seen heaven and been dragged through hell, made her pause. All right, Mr. Fancy Suit, she said, arms crossed. Let's say I say yes, what's in it for me? Adrian's lips twitched into a smirk. A chance to turn heads. A night of luxury. And he hesitated, then added, maybe, just maybe, the opportunity to remind a certain someone that losing me was the biggest mistake of her life. Isla tilted her head, studying him. His honesty surprised her. Most men in suits would never admit to seeking revenge in such a raw, unpolished way. You want to make your ex jealous? She mused. He chuckled, the sound low and smooth. That's one way to put it. And I'm supposed to be your... what? Arm candy? Adrian's gaze softened slightly, his voice turning serious. I don't need arm candy. I need a woman who can walk into that room and make them all wonder why I let her go. There was something in his tone, something unspoken, something almost broken. And against all logic, Isla found herself intrigued. What if I embarrass you? She challenged, testing him. Adrian took a step closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, warm cedar, dark spice, and a hint of something dangerous. Somehow, I don't think you would. The confidence in his voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Isla swallowed. What was she doing? She barely knew this man, and yet she wanted to know what would happen if she stepped into his world, even if only for a night. She extended her hand. Fine. But I have one rule. Adrian arched an eyebrow. And what's that? You don't get to treat me like I'm beneath you. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. He shook her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. Deal. And just like that, her fate intertwined with his. The next morning, Isla found herself in a place she never thought she'd see, the penthouse suite of one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. The contrast between her past life and this new reality was dizzying. The bed was enormous, dressed in silk sheets softer than anything she had ever touched. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering skyline. She hesitated before stepping out of the lavish guest room. Would they throw her out once they realized she didn't belong? A soft knock at the door made her jump. A well-dressed woman in her mid-50s entered, smiling warmly. "I'm Evelyn, Mr. Kane's personal assistant. He asked me to take care of everything you need." Isla blinked. "Everything?" Evelyn nodded. "Wardrobe, etiquette, beauty treatments, whatever makes you comfortable for the event." Isla almost laughed. She had spent years fighting for scraps, and now someone was offering her a world she had never dared to dream of. I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. Evelyn's expression softened. "Mr. Kane believes you can." Isla swallowed hard. Adrian Kane, the man who had picked her out of nowhere, offering her a temporary escape from a life of struggle. "Why?" she exhaled. "All right, let's do this." At the moment Isla stepped into the luxury boutique, the entire store seemed to still. The attendants glanced at her worn-out clothes, but before they could say anything, Adrian walked in behind her, his presence demanding attention. "She gets anything she wants," he said coolly. The staff instantly transformed from skeptical to accommodating. Isla turned to Adrian. "You didn't have to come." He smirked, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I wanted to see the moment you realized you belong in this world." Her heart did something strange at his words. "I don't belong here, do I?" But, as the first gown slid over her frame, as the mirror reflected a version of herself she had long forgotten, a woman with grace, strength, and undeniable beauty, something shifted inside her. She stepped out of the fitting room, draped in a deep red dress that hugged her curves perfectly, the silky material flowing like liquid fire. Adrian looked up, and he stared. His normally controlled expression faltered for just a second, something dark and unreadable flickering in his gaze. A slow, approving smile touched his lips. "Damn." Heat crept up Isla's neck. "It's just a dress." "No," he murmured, stepping closer, his voice lower. "It's not just a dress. It's you." The air between them thickened, charged with something neither of them could name. For the first time, Adrian wasn't thinking about revenge. And for the first time, Isla wasn't thinking about survival. They were just two people standing too close, trapped in a moment they didn't see coming. And neither of them wanted to break it. As they left the boutique, Isla couldn't shake the way Adrian had looked at her. Like she was more than just a woman helping him prove a point, like she was someone. She glanced up at him as they walked side by side, his presence both intimidating and strangely reassuring. "So, Mr. Kane," she said, teasing, "are you sure you can handle taking me to this wedding?" He smirked. "Are you sure you can handle being my date?" She grinned, stepping closer, just enough to brush against his arm. "Guess we'll find out." Adrian chuckled, shaking his head. Neither of them knew that this deal, this impulsive, reckless deal, was about to unravel everything they thought they knew about love, pain, and fate. Because once they stepped into that wedding together, there would be no turning back. The wedding was just a few hours away. Isla sat in front of the massive vanity mirror, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Gone were the torn clothes, the dirt-streaked face, the wary, guarded eyes. In their place stood someone breathtaking, someone with strength, grace, and a quiet fire burning in her gaze. The deep red gown she had chosen fit like a dream, hugging her curves and flowing like liquid silk. Her long, wavy brown hair cascaded over her shoulders, and the makeup, subtle yet striking, brought out the depth of her eyes. She felt powerful, she felt seen. And that terrified her. The soft click of the door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. She turned, and the breath in her throat hitched. Adrian Kane stood in the doorway, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that made him look devastatingly handsome. The crisp white shirt, the dark tie, the way the suit molded to his broad shoulders, it was almost unfair how effortlessly attractive he was. But what caught her off guard wasn't his looks. It was the way he was looking at her. His usual controlled expression was absent, His piercing blue eyes trailed over her from head to toe, lingering, taking in every inch of her. For the first time, there was no cold amusement, no smirk, just raw, unguarded awe. You ... His voice was lower than usual, almost husky. He exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. You look incredible. Heat spread across Isla's skin. She had never been one to blush, but under Adrian's gaze, she felt seen in a way she never had before. "Thank you," she said softly. A slow, almost dazed smile tugged at the corner of Adrian's lips. "Remind me again why I wanted to make my ex jealous?" Isla raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "Because you're a man with a bruised ego." Adrian let out a low chuckle, stepping closer. "Right. That." His gaze flickered to her lips for a fraction of a second before he looked back into her eyes. "But I have a feeling you're going to do a lot more than just make her jealous tonight." Isla smirked, stepping forward until there was barely a breath of space between them. "That's the idea, isn't it?" Something flickered in his eyes. Something dangerous. Something tempting. And then, before she could let herself drown in it, he offered her his arm. "Shall we?" She slid her hand into the crook of his elbow. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of something electric ran up her arm. Neither of them said a word about it, but they both felt it. The wedding was held at the Rosewood Manor, one of the most exclusive venues in the city. Chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting golden light across the marble floors. Tables adorned with fresh roses and flickering candles surrounded the dance floor, where high society guests laughed and sipped on champagne. But as soon as Adrian and Isla stepped through the grand entrance, all eyes turned to them. A hush spread through the crowd. Isla felt it immediately, the way the whispers began, the way women's gazes lingered on Adrian, some envious, some intrigued, and most of all, the way a certain woman's face froze in shock. That must be her, Adrian's ex-fiancée. She was beautiful in a predictable way, golden curls, perfectly styled, wearing a designer gown that screamed wealth. She stood beside her groom, but her eyes weren't on him. They were locked onto Adrian. "Adrian?" Amanda's voice was light, controlled, but there was something tight in it, something bitter. Adrian smirked, his grip on Isla's waist tightening ever so slightly. "Amanda." Her eyes flickered to Isla, scanning her like she was some puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "And you are?" Amanda asked, her tone laced with forced politeness. Isla tilted her head, letting a slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. She could play this game too. She rested a hand on Adrian's chest, feeling the way his muscles tensed under her touch. Isla. Adrian's date. Amanda's lips parted slightly, her mask slipping for just a second. Adrian's voice was smooth as silk. "I figured it would be impolite to come alone." Amanda forced a laugh, but the tension in her shoulders was unmistakable. "Of course." Isla felt Adrian's hand brush against her lower back, a silent signal. "We're winning." But this game was far from over. The evening unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated play. Isla could feel it, how Adrian's presence was shaking the foundation of this wedding. Amanda couldn't stop stealing glances at him. Her new husband was visibly annoyed. And the other women? They were staring at Adrian like he was the most dangerous, irresistible thing in the room. Isla, however, was starting to see something deeper. Adrian wasn't just here for revenge. There was pain in his eyes when he looked at Amanda. Old wounds, never healed. And somehow that realization made Isla's heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. A slow song began to play and Adrian turned to Isla, holding out his hand. "Dance with me," he said. But there was something in his voice, something more than just a request, something almost like a plea. Isla hesitated for only a second before slipping her hand into his. As they moved to the center of the dance floor, the world around them faded. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. Their bodies fit together perfectly, moving in slow, effortless synchrony. She looked up at him. "Tell me something." "What? Did you ever love her?" Adrian's grip on her waist tightened slightly. He was silent for a moment before finally answering. "I thought I did," he murmured. "But now, I'm not so sure." Isla swallowed hard. She had expected a smirk, a joke, anything but the honesty in his voice. She looked away. Maybe love isn't as simple as we think. Adrian's fingers traced small, absent-minded patterns on her back. His voice was quieter now, lower. Maybe it's not. Their eyes met again, and for the first time since this entire game had started, it didn't feel like a game anymore. As Isla and Adrian swayed to the slow rhythm of the music, something changed between them. It was supposed to be an act, just a show to make Amanda jealous. But now Isla could feel her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with their plan. Adrian's hand rested firmly on her waist, his warmth seeping through the fabric of her dress. His scent, an intoxicating mix of cedarwood and something distinctly him, wrapped around her, pulling her deeper into his presence. She could hear his breath, steady yet controlled. His fingers, barely touching the small of her back, sent shivers down her spine. And then, in a whisper that only she could hear, he said, "You're doing too good of a job." Isla swallowed, tilting her head to look up at him. "What do you mean?" Adrian's lips quirked into a small smirk, but there was something serious in his gaze. "You're making it hard to remember this is all just pretend." Isla felt her breath hitch. She should have laughed it off. She should have given him a teasing reply. But instead, she found herself trapped in his eyes, those damn blue eyes that seemed to see more of her than anyone ever had. She realized in that moment how dangerous this was becoming, because it wasn't just his heart at risk, it was hers too. A loud, forced cough broke the moment between them. Amanda stood just a few feet away, her carefully composed mask cracking at the edges. "Adrian, I had no idea you'd be here," she said, her smile tight. Adrian raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his gaze. "Really? Considering how many times you've checked to see if I was looking at you tonight, I find that hard to believe." Amanda's cheeks flushed with irritation. "I just wanted to be polite." "Of course," Adrian said smoothly, "because that's what you do best. Politeness." There was something bitter in his tone, something Isla didn't miss. Amanda's gaze flickered to Isla. "You look lovely," she said, though the words sounded forced. "And, remind me, what do you do for a living?" Isla felt the question like a dagger. Amanda didn't really want to know what she did. She wanted to humiliate her. She wanted to expose the fact that Isla was nothing like them, a nobody. But before Isla could answer, Adrian spoke first. "She's an artist," he said smoothly, his hand tightening around Isla's waist. "She creates things far more valuable than anything money can buy." Amanda's expression faltered. Isla turned her head toward Adrian, startled by the confidence in his voice. He was protecting her. Amanda let out a small, amused chuckle. "How sweet. So, how did you two meet?" Adrian smirked. "Fate." The word was simple, but the way he said it made Isla's stomach flutter. Amanda let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Fate? That's a bit dramatic, don't you think?" Adrian's eyes darkened slightly. "You'd know all about dramatics, wouldn't you, Amanda?" The tension was thick. Isla could see Amanda's new husband watching the exchange with a clenched jaw, clearly not happy that his wife was still so affected by Adrian's presence. Before Amanda could say anything else, Adrian turned to Isla and whispered, "Let's give them something to talk about." And then he pulled her closer. Without a second thought, Adrian cupped Isla's face, tilting her chin up slightly. His thumb traced her cheek in a way that sent heat coursing through her veins. Then, with deliberate slowness, he leaned in. Their lips met in a soft, unhurried kiss. But the moment their mouths touched, Isla felt something she wasn't prepared for. a rush of warmth, a spark that wasn't fake. Adrian's lips were firm yet gentle, as if savouring the moment. His hand tangled into her hair, pulling her just a fraction closer. The world around them faded. No whispers, no music, no Amanda. Just them. Isla knew she should stop it. She knew this wasn't part of the plan, but she couldn't. She didn't want to. Because in that moment, Adrian wasn't just playing a role, and neither was she. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but the damage had been done. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian's gaze flickered to Isla's lips, his eyes dark with something undeniable. She felt breathless, dazed, like she had just stepped off a roller coaster that had no brakes. And then the whispers started. The guests were buzzing with shock and curiosity. Amanda's face was frozen in horror. Her new husband looked furious. And Isla, she realized in that moment that she had made a terrible mistake. Because pretending to be Adrian's date was one thing. But now she wasn't sure where the pretending ended and where the truth began. The moment the kiss ended, Isla felt lightheaded, as if the world had tilted on its axis. Adrian's eyes were still locked onto hers, filled with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. He had kissed her to prove a point, to shake Amanda, to make her see what she had lost. But was that really the only reason? Because the way his hands lingered on her waist, the way his lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. It felt like something more, much more. The air between them sizzled, thick with something neither of them dared to name. And then a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Adrian, what the hell was that?" It was Amanda. Her voice trembled with undisguised fury, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the stem of her champagne glass. Her new husband, Ethan, stood beside her, his jaw so tight it looked like he was about to snap. The entire ballroom had gone eerily silent. All eyes were on them. Adrian smirked, unbothered. "What do you mean?" Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line. "You know exactly what I mean." Adrian shrugged. "Oh, you mean the kiss? Well, considering you never had a problem kissing me in front of an audience, I thought you wouldn't mind." Amanda's face flushed red, her mask of composure slipping. "You're unbelievable." Adrian chuckled darkly. "No, Amanda, you are. Marrying him while still checking to see if I'm looking at you?" He tilted his head toward her husband. "That's cruel, even for you." Ethan's expression hardened. Amanda looked like she wanted to scream. But Isla, she just wanted to disappear. Because she wasn't part of this war. She was just a pawn in a game she hadn't even realized she was playing. And yet, Adrian's fingers were still on her waist, as if he didn't want to let go, as if he had forgotten this was just pretend. "I need air," Isla whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Adrian turned to her, his brow creasing in concern. "Isla," but she was already moving. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she rushed out of the ballroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't stop until she reached the grand balcony outside. The cool night air kissed her skin, a stark contrast to the fire raging inside her. She gripped the railing, inhaling deeply, trying to steady herself. What had just happened? What was happening to her? The way Adrian kissed her. It was supposed to be an act, a show. But why did it feel so real? Why did her body still burn from his touch? "Isla." His voice was low, almost hesitant. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. She wasn't ready to face him. But that didn't stop him from closing the distance. She felt his presence behind her, his warmth wrapping around her even though they weren't touching. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Are you okay?" Isla let out a small, breathy laugh. "That depends. Are you going to kiss me again in front of 100 people just to prove a point?" Adrian smirked, but there was something soft in his expression. Something different. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he admitted, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. She turned to face him, her heart slamming against her ribs at how close he was. "Then why did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian held her gaze, his eyes flickering with something undeniable. Something dangerous. Something real. "I don't know," he said honestly. And somehow that made it worse. Because if he didn't know why he kissed her, if it wasn't just for show, then what did that mean? What did it mean for them? For her heart? A breeze swept through, making Isla shiver. Without thinking, Adrian reached out, rubbing her bare arms gently. It was such a small gesture, yet it sent electricity racing through her skin. "Tell me something," he said, his voice quieter now. "Did that kiss feel fake to you?" Her breath caught. Her mind screamed at her to lie, to tell him that yes, of course it was just an act. But the way he was looking at her, like he already knew the truth. Like he already knew that when his lips touched hers, something inside her had shattered and rebuilt itself at the same time. So instead of lying, she whispered, "No." Adrian's fingers brushed her cheek, his touch achingly soft. "Then what do we do now?" he murmured. Her heart stopped, because for the first time since this game had started, they weren't pretending anymore, and that terrified her more than anything. Isla's heart thundered in her chest. Adrian's words lingered in the air between them, wrapping around her like an invisible force she couldn't escape. Then what do we do now? It was such a simple question. But the answer? It was anything but simple. She looked up at him, searching his face, desperate for some kind of clarity. But all she saw was confusion. And something else, something she shouldn't see. Longing. Her breath hitched as Adrian took a step closer, his fingers still resting lightly on her arm. She could feel the heat radiating off him. He was so close. Too close. "We can't do this," she whispered. But even as she said the words, she didn't step away. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Why not?" Isla let out a soft, almost bitter laugh. "Because this isn't real. We're playing a game, remember?" Adrian exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. "Maybe I don't want to play anymore," he admitted, his voice rough with something dangerous. Her heart skipped a beat, but before she could respond, a loud voice shattered the moment. "There you are." Isla and Adrian turned at the same time. Amanda stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression a mix of amusement and icy jealousy. The glow of the chandeliers from inside framed her perfectly, making her look like some kind of vengeful angel. Behind her, Ethan was watching. His gaze wasn't on Adrian. It was on Isla. And the look in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Interest. Amanda stepped forward, tilting her head. "Well, well," she mused, her eyes flicking between Isla and Adrian. "You disappeared so fast after that performance inside." Isla stiffened. Adrian's expression turned cold. "If you're here to cause a scene, Amanda—" "Oh, no," Amanda smirked. "I just came to congratulate you both." Adrian narrowed his eyes. "Congratulate us?" Isla asked cautiously. Amanda's lips curled. "Yes, for being so convincing." Her voice was mocking, dripping with disbelief, like she didn't actually believe what she had seen, like she thought Isla was just another piece in Adrian's revenge. And that stung. Isla opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Amanda's attention shifted to Ethan, who, instead of watching his new wife, was still staring at Isla. Amanda noticed. Her smirk faltered, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely threatened. Her fingers twitched at her side, her entire body going tense as she realized something. Ethan wasn't thinking about her, not anymore. And it was because of Isla. Adrian noticed it too. His gaze flicked from Ethan to Isla, and something dark passed through his expression. Possessiveness. Like he didn't like the way Ethan was looking at her. Like he wanted to pull her closer, claim her, protect her. But Isla, she was frozen. because the last thing she wanted was to be caught in the middle of their war. She had already been used by Adrian to get under Amanda's skin. Now, was she going to be used again? By Ethan, to make Amanda jealous? The thought made her stomach twist. She took a step back, shaking her head. "I need to go," she murmured. Adrian turned to her instantly. "Isla." She didn't let him finish. She spun on her heels and walked away, her heart pounding with every step. But just as she was about to disappear into the hallway, "Isla, wait!" A hand caught her wrist. She gasped, turning around, and found herself face to face not with Adrian, but with Ethan. Isla swallowed hard. Ethan's grip on her wrist wasn't rough, but it was firm. She felt trapped. She glanced over his shoulder, but Adrian was still standing on the balcony, his hands clenched into fists. He had seen, and the look in his eyes was deadly. But before he could move, Ethan leaned in close, lowering his voice so only Isla could hear. "You don't belong with him." Isla stiffened. Her pulse raced. "What?" she whispered. Ethan smiled slightly, his eyes calculating. "He's using you, Isla, just like he used Amanda," he said smoothly. "But you deserve better." She yanked her wrist free, stepping back. "Let me guess," she said, voice sharper now. "And you think you're better?" Ethan chuckled. "I think I could offer you something real." Her breath caught. Was this a game to him? Was she just a pawn in his battle with Adrian? She shook her head. "I'm not interested," Ethan smirked. "No? Then why do you look so scared?" Isla stiffened, because the truth was, she wasn't scared of Ethan. She was scared of what Adrian might do if he saw this. And when she glanced back toward the balcony, her fears were confirmed, because Adrian was already striding toward them, his eyes locked on Ethan. His expression was pure fire. And Isla had a feeling things were about to explode. The air between them was electric. Adrian's rage was palpable as he stormed toward Ethan, his eyes dark with a fury Isla had never seen before. Ethan, on the other hand, remained calm, almost amused, as if he was enjoying provoking Adrian. And Isla? She felt trapped between them. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about power. It was about control. It was about two men who had spent years fighting a silent war over a woman, Amanda. But now, for the first time, that war had a new battlefield. Her. Let her go. Adrian's voice was low, dangerous, possessive. Ethan smirked, his grip on Isla's wrist loosening but not completely releasing her. Why? Afraid of a little competition? Isla's breath caught. She could feel Adrian's fury burning through the space between them, and a shiver ran down her spine. "I said." Adrian took another step forward, his jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "Let her go." Ethan chuckled, finally releasing Isla's wrist with a slow, mocking smile. "There," he said, holding his hands up in surrender. "No need to get violent, old friend." Adrian's nostrils flared. "We were never friends," he bit out. Ethan's smirk widened. "No, I suppose not." For a moment, silence fell between them. The tension was suffocating. Isla could feel the weight of their unspoken history, the deep resentment and the wounds that had never healed. She wanted to say something, to stop whatever was about to happen next. But before she could, Adrian suddenly grabbed her hand, firm, warm, undeniable. And then he pulled her against him, right in front of Ethan. Isla gasped as her body collided with Adrian's, his arms wrapped around her waist, anchoring her to him. She could feel the hard muscles beneath his suit, the rapid beat of his heart against her palm. He was holding her like she belonged to him, like he was making a statement. And maybe he was. Ethan's smirk faltered. Adrian's voice was low, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "Stay away from her." Ethan let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "You don't even know what you want, do you, Adrian?" Adrian didn't respond. He just tightened his grip on Isla, his thumb absent-mindedly brushing her waist. The touch sent heat rushing through her body. She knew she should pull away. This was dangerous. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Not when Adrian was holding her like this. Not when he was looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. Ethan sighed, his expression turning almost bored. "You're making a mistake," he said simply. Adrian's jaw clenched. Ethan smirked. And then, just like that, he walked away, leaving Adrian and Isla alone in the dimly lit hallway. Leaving Isla completely breathless. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Adrian's arms were still wrapped around her. His breath was warm against her temple, his scent filling her senses. His hands, large, firm, safe, rested on the small of her back. Too intimate. Too much. Isla swallowed hard. She needed to step away. She needed to say something. But then, Adrian spoke first. "Are you okay?" His voice was softer now, gentler, like the anger had drained from his body the moment Ethan left. Isla nodded. But the truth? She didn't know if she was okay, because the way Adrian was looking at her now, it made her heart ache. He wasn't looking at her like she was a game anymore. He wasn't looking at her like she was part of some plan. He was looking at her like he wanted her, like he had always wanted her. Her breath caught. "Adrian." He lifted a hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, barely there, but it sent shivers through her body. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. Her lips parted, her pulse thundered. He was giving her a choice, a way out. But the problem? She didn't want to take it. She didn't want him to stop, and before she could think, before she could talk herself out of it, she whispered, "I don't want you to stop." Adrian sucked in a breath, and then his lips crashed against hers. Isla's world stopped. Her mind screamed that this was a mistake, but her body melted into Adrian's. His lips were hungry, demanding, desperate, as if he had been holding back for too long, and now that he had finally let go, he couldn't stop. His hands, firm yet gentle, cupped her face, tilting it up so he could kiss her deeper. And Isla? She let herself fall. She gave in to the fire burning between them, to the way his body pressed against hers, to the way his lips felt, like a promise of something she shouldn't want, a promise of something that could ruin her. But in that moment, she didn't care. She wanted to be ruined by him. She wanted to drown in the way he made her feel. The soft groan that escaped his lips sent shivers down her spine. She clutched his shirt, pulling him closer. But then, a sound, a soft gasp. Someone was watching. The spell shattered. Isla and Adrian pulled apart, breathing heavily, their bodies still pressed together. Her lips felt swollen from his kiss. His eyes were dark, intense, filled with something dangerous. But the moment was gone, and when Isla turned her head, she saw Amanda, standing at the end of the hallway, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, looking between them with a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, something unreadable. For a second, no one moved. Then, Amanda's expression hardened. A bitter, almost mocking smile curved her lips. "Well?" she said, her voice smooth but dripping with venom. "That was unexpected." Adrian's jaw clenched. Isla's breath hitched. Amanda took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Tell me, Adrian, is she your new toy?" Adrian stiffened. Isla flinched. But Amanda wasn't done. "Or did you bring her here to get back at me?" Adrian's hand tightened around Isla's waist, almost protective, but Isla could feel the tension in his body, could feel the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. Amanda crossed her arms, tilting her head. "What's wrong, darling?" she taunted. "Didn't expect me to catch you?" Adrian's voice was cold. "I don't owe you an explanation." Amanda laughed. It was bitter, sharp, laced with jealousy. "Of course you don't," she said. "You never did." The way she said it, it meant something Isla didn't understand. But she could feel it, the past, the pain, the unfinished business between them. And suddenly Isla felt like an outsider in her own story, like she had stepped into something far bigger than she realized. Amanda's gaze shifted to Isla. Her eyes raked over her from her worn dress to her messy hair. Then she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile that made Isla feel small. "You poor thing," Amanda said sweetly. "Did you think you were special?" Isla's heart dropped. Amanda's words cut deep, slicing through the warmth Adrian's kiss had left behind. Did she? Did she really think Adrian saw her as something more than just a distraction? A game? A way to get revenge on Amanda? Amanda saw the flicker of doubt in Isla's eyes and smirked. "Trust me, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're just another momentary amusement for him." Isla swallowed hard, fighting the sting in her chest. She wanted to believe Amanda was wrong. But what if she wasn't? What if Isla had been foolish to think that Adrian's kiss had meant anything? She needed to get out of here. Now, without another word, Isla turned and walked away. Adrian called her name, but she didn't stop, didn't look back, couldn't, because if she did, she knew she would break. Her vision blurred with unshed tears. She didn't belong here. She wasn't part of Adrian's world. And maybe she never would be. Adrian stood frozen. He had never felt this way before. Watching Isla walk away, her figure disappearing down the hallway, was like watching the one thing that mattered slip through his fingers. And for the first time in his life, he panicked. The same man who had built an empire, who had stood before ruthless businessmen without flinching, who had mastered the art of control, lost it. His heart pounded against his ribs. He wanted to run after her, to stop her, to tell her that Amanda's words meant nothing. But his feet were rooted to the ground. Amanda was still there, watching him, her arms crossed, her smirk victorious. "Wow," she whispered. "Didn't expect you to actually care, Adrian." His jaw clenched. "Stay out of this, Amanda." She laughed, shaking her head. "Oh, darling, but I am in this. Because you still haven't figured it out, have you?" Her gaze flickered toward the hallway where Isla had vanished. "You don't deserve her." Those words hit him harder than he expected. Because deep down, he feared she was right. But none of that mattered now. Not when Isla was out there, hurting. He turned on his heel and ran, past the grand ballroom, past the curious gazes of guests whispering about what had just happened. His heart was racing. His mind screamed one thing over and over: find her. Isla burst through the doors of the mansion, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She needed to get away. The night air was cold, biting against her skin, but it wasn't enough to numb the ache in her chest. Amanda's words kept replaying in her mind. "Did you think you were special? You're just another momentary amusement for him." A bitter sob escaped her lips. Had she really been that naive? She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold back the tears. She shouldn't have let herself fall for him. She shouldn't have believed even for a second that she meant anything to him. And yet, that kiss, it had felt real, hadn't it? "Isla!" Her heart stopped. She turned, and there he was, Adrian, running toward her, his black suit slightly undone, his tie loose, his hair a mess. He looked nothing like the cold, calculated billionaire the world knew. He looked like a man on the verge of losing something precious, and it terrified her. She stepped back instinctively, but he didn't stop. Not until he was right in front of her, breathing hard, looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. "Isla, don't do this." His voice was hoarse, desperate, her throat tightened. "Do what, Adrian?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Leave, because that's exactly what I should do." His brows furrowed, pain flickered in his eyes. "No." "Then what do you want from me?" she demanded, frustration and heartbreak mixing in her voice. "The truth, Adrian. I need to know." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Isla, He paused, struggling to find the words. He had never had to fight for someone before, but she wasn't just someone. She was everything. "You think Amanda was right?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "You think I brought you here for revenge?" She swallowed. "Didn't you?" His gaze hardened. "No." Her breath caught. "Then why, Adrian?" she whispered. His hands reached for her, cupping her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Because you're the only thing that makes sense in my life right now." Her eyes widened. "I didn't bring you here for Amanda," he continued, his thumb brushing away the tear that had slipped down her cheek. "I brought you here because I couldn't stand the thought of going to that wedding alone. Because I knew if I did, I'd be looking at the wrong woman all night." Her lips parted, but no words came out. "I would have been looking for you." She stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shatter. "You don't understand, Isla." His voice was raw, unguarded. "From the moment I met you, I haven't been able to think about anything else. You've changed me. You—" He broke off, taking a deep breath, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "You're not just some distraction. You're the only thing that feels real." A soft gasp left her lips. Was this real? Could she believe him? Her mind was screaming to be cautious. But her heart was already his, and when she saw the way he looked at her, like she was his entire world, she knew this wasn't a game. This wasn't about Amanda anymore. This was about them. Her walls crumbled. She took a shaky breath. "Adrian." His thumb traced her jawline, his forehead pressing against hers. "Don't push me away, Isla." His voice was pleading. "Because I won't survive losing you." Tears welled in her eyes, and this time, she didn't stop them. Because finally, she believed him. Finally, she let herself fall completely. And when he kissed her again, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, deep, and full of every unspoken word between them. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The world around them seemed to disappear. It was just Adrian and Isla. The way he held her, the way their lips moved in perfect harmony, spoke volumes that words never could. The kiss wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise that the world could fall apart, but this, what they had, would endure. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing heavily, their hearts racing in sync. Adrian gently pulled back, his hands still cupping Isla's face. He looked at her with eyes full of admiration, vulnerability, and a quiet longing that made her chest tighten. "Isla," he whispered, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know one thing. I don't want to do it without you." Her heart skipped a beat. There was something in his words that made her feel safe, something that made her want to trust him, even with all the fears and doubts still lingering in her mind. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat under her palm. "Adrian, Her voice faltered, and she took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "I've never felt like this before. I've never trusted anyone like I trust you." The way he looked at her made her feel like the center of his universe, like she was the only person who mattered. "And that terrifies me." His smile was soft, knowing. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, whispering, "It terrifies me too." She laughed softly, the sound like music to his ears, before placing a tender kiss on his lips, tasting the sweetness of their shared vulnerability. They spent the next few hours walking together through the mansion's garden, the moonlight casting a gentle glow over them. Isla still couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting to tear them apart. She had seen the way Amanda looked at Adrian, the way she possessed him with her eyes, like he was hers to command. But Adrian wasn't hers anymore. He was hers. Her heart swelled with emotion, but there was still a lingering doubt that she couldn't ignore. "What if I'm just a rebound for you?" Isla asked suddenly, her voice soft but vulnerable. What if I'm just here to make you feel better after everything with Amanda? Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her. His expression was serious, intense, like he was trying to imprint her image into his memory. Isla, look at me. His hands gently cupped her cheeks, his thumbs brushing over her skin, soothing her. What we have isn't just a rebound. It's real. You are real to me. You always have been. She searched his eyes, looking for any hint of dishonesty, but all she saw was sincerity. I promise you, I won't hurt you, he continued, his voice steady and firm. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I'm not going to let anyone, especially Amanda, stand in our way. Isla's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Okay, Adrian. I believe you. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest seemed to lift, if only for a moment. She had made a choice, to trust him, to let herself fall completely. And then, just as the silence between them became too much to bear, Adrian pulled her into his arms, tight, secure, like he never wanted to let go. We've got this, Isla, he murmured into her hair. We can face whatever comes together. But the moment of peace was short-lived. The next day, as Isla sat in her small apartment, a knock came at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the unease that spread through her body was instant. When she opened the door, she was met with the last person she thought would show up. Amanda. Her eyes were cold, calculating. Isla tried to close the door, but Amanda stepped forward, blocking her path. I need to talk to you, Amanda said, her tone icy and sharp. Isla crossed her arms, keeping her distance. There's nothing to talk about, Amanda. Amanda's lips curled into a sneer. You're wrong, sweetheart. She took a step closer. I know exactly what's going on between you and Adrian, and I'm telling you right now you're making a mistake. Isla's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Amanda's eyes flickered with something dark, something that made Isla uneasy. You think Adrian's going to stay with you? That he'll choose you over everything we've built together? She chuckled bitterly. Adrian doesn't do relationships, Isla. He's just bored. And when he's bored, he moves on. Isla's breath caught in her throat. She had been afraid of this. But she wasn't going to let Amanda win. Not now. She took a deep breath and stood tall. You're wrong. Adrian doesn't want you. He's with me now. And I'm not going anywhere. Amanda's expression darkened. She took a step back, her eyes narrowing. You're playing with fire, Isla. You'll see. And then she turned and walked away, leaving Isla standing there, her heart pounding. Later that night, as Isla sat in Adrian's arms, the weight of Amanda's words still lingered in her mind. Adrian noticed the silence. He sensed the tension in her body, the way her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. Isla? He whispered softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. What's going on? She hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. I saw Amanda today. He stiffened slightly but didn't let go of her. What did she say? Isla swallowed. She told me that you're going to leave me, that I'm just a rebound. For a moment, Adrian's jaw clenched, but then he pulled her even closer, his lips grazing her forehead. Isla, listen to me, he said, his voice low, almost like a vow. I'm not going anywhere. What I feel for you is real, and I'm not going to let anyone, especially Amanda, tear us apart. She closed her eyes, breathing in the comfort of his words, and in that moment she knew. This was where she belonged. With him. Adrian's world had always been one of certainty. Success, business deals, and power had been the pillars of his existence for years. Yet, with Isla in his arms, all of that felt insignificant. In her presence, there was an overwhelming sense of peace and purpose that he had never known before. As they lay together on the balcony, the night sky illuminated with stars, Adrian found himself thinking about their future. He had never imagined someone like her, someone so pure, so real, so utterly capable of changing everything in his life. Isla? His voice was soft, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. She turned to him, a smile curving her lips as her eyes met his. The soft glow of the moon reflected in her eyes, making her look even more beautiful than he had ever seen her. Her voice was a melodic hum. He reached out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his fingers grazing her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. What do you see for us? In the future, I mean. Isla's heart skipped. She hadn't really allowed herself to think about it too much, hadn't allowed herself to dream. After all, dreams were fragile and she had learned long ago that they could easily be shattered. But Adrian was different. His touch, the way he looked at her, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to dream again. She bit her lip, unsure how to answer, but then she decided to be honest. I see a future where we're together, where I don't have to hide from the world. I see us facing everything side by side, no matter what comes. Adrian's heart swelled. Her words were exactly what he had been hoping to hear. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers gently, sealing that promise without needing more words. I want that too, he whispered against her lips, his voice unwavering. I see a future with you in it, Isla. A future where nothing else matters except for us. Their newfound peace, however, would not go unchallenged. The next day, Adrian received an urgent phone call from his lawyer. The sound of the ringing phone shattered the tranquility of their morning. Adrian stood up quickly, trying to hide the frustration on his face, but Isla saw right through him. What's going on? She asked, her voice laced with concern. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, clearly annoyed. It's about my family's estate. There's a dispute over the inheritance. Some people think I don't deserve it, and they're trying to tear everything apart. Isla's heart sank. She knew how much his family's reputation and fortune meant to him. But what she didn't know was how deep the conflict went. Adrian looked at her, his expression hardening. I need to deal with this, but I'm not going to let it affect us. Not again. I'm not going to lose you over this. Isla stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. You won't lose me, Adrian. I'm right here. The sincerity in her eyes touched him deeply. It was all he needed to hear. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead before stepping back. Thank you, Isla. I don't know what I'd do without you. Despite their determination to move forward, the past had a way of creeping in. The day after Adrian's phone call, Amanda made her next move. This time she wasn't so subtle. She called Adrian's office, asking to meet him. And though Adrian had no intention of seeing her again, the business side of things made it difficult to avoid her. I have to see her, Adrian muttered, his jaw clenched. Isla knew what was coming. She could see the tension in Adrian's face, the way his hand trembled slightly when he picked up the phone. But there was no anger in his demeanour, only resignation. I'll be fine, Adrian assured Isla, his eyes meeting hers with determination. I don't need to involve you in this. It's just business. Isla knew better than to argue. The storm between them and Amanda had been building, and it was time to face it head-on. But deep down she couldn't shake the fear that Amanda might still be trying to win him back. After Adrian left for the meeting, Isla was left alone in their shared space. She paced back and forth, her thoughts spiraling. Her insecurities, her fears of being second best, flared up. What if Amanda had come to him with more than just business on her mind? At the cafe, the tension was palpable. Amanda sat across from Adrian, her gaze sharp and calculating. She leaned forward, her smile cool as she addressed him. I know you've been avoiding me, Adrian, she began, her voice deceptively sweet. But we both know there's unfinished business between us. Adrian resisted the urge to roll his eyes. What do you want, Amanda? She let out a small laugh. You're not going to give up that easily, are you? She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning him before she spoke again. I'm here because I know that deep down, you're not over me. You're not over what we had. And Isla? She's just a distraction. You and I both know she's not your future. Adrian's jaw tightened. His heart raced. He could feel his controls slipping, but he wasn't going to give Amanda the satisfaction of seeing it. You're wrong, Amanda, he said calmly. Isla is my future. I don't need anything from you. What we had is over. It's been over. Her expression darkened. Is it? Or is she just a way for you to feel better about yourself? A way for you to prove you don't need me? Adrian leaned in slightly, his voice cold but firm. Number, she's the woman I love. Amanda froze. There it was. The truth. And she couldn't handle it. The look on Adrian's face was enough to shatter her illusion that she still had any hold over him. She stood up abruptly, throwing one last icy glance at him. I'll see you soon, Adrian. You'll regret this. When Adrian returned home later that day, the weight of the confrontation was clear in his eyes. But Isla was there, waiting for him, a steady presence that grounded him. Isla, he began, his voice strained. She stepped forward before he could say more, pulling him into her arms. It's okay, Adrian. I trust you, she whispered, her words unwavering. He held her close, feeling the comfort of her embrace, and he realized in that moment that no matter what Amanda or the world threw at them, they could face it together. You're all I need, he murmured into her hair, and she could feel the sincerity of his words deep within her. Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it, choosing instead to focus entirely on the woman who had claimed his heart. For the first time in a long while, Adrian felt truly at peace. They were stronger than ever, together. The weeks that followed the confrontation with Amanda felt like a turning point for both Adrian and Isla. The weight that had once been on Adrian's shoulders began to lift, but it wasn't just the resolution of the inheritance dispute or the dismissal of Amanda's manipulations that brought him peace. It was the fact that Isla was by his side. In her, he had found not just love, but understanding, trust, and a shared vision for the future. Adrian woke up to the soft light of dawn spilling through the curtains, and there she was lying beside him, a peaceful smile on her face. Her hair was messy from sleep, but in that moment she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Isla was home, and she had become everything he never knew he needed. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the outline of her jaw. The touch was soft, reverent, his way of silently expressing the depth of his affection. Her eyes fluttered open, and the moment their gazes met, the whole world seemed to disappear. Good morning, she whispered, her voice still heavy with sleep but full of love. Adrian couldn't help but smile. Good morning, my love. The words rolled off his tongue so naturally it felt like a promise. She stretched out, nestling closer to him, her head resting on his chest. She could hear the steady beat of his heart, and in that sound she found her anchor, her certainty. This was real. I've been thinking, Adrian said after a moment, his voice thoughtful. Maybe we should take that trip we've been talking about, just the two of us, to somewhere far away from all of this. Isla's heart skipped a beat. She had never been the type to dream about grand adventures or faraway places, but with Adrian, she realized how much she longed to explore life, not just the world, but everything they could be together. I'd love that, she said, her voice soft but full of excitement. Adrian smiled and kissed her forehead, a tender kiss that spoke volumes. I'm going to make sure you see the world, Isla. Every single bit of it. Days later, Adrian surprised Isla with a spontaneous getaway to a secluded island, a place where no one knew their names, no one cared about their pasts or reputations, just the two of them, free to enjoy each other's company. The island was paradise. Soft white sands, turquoise waters, and lush green landscapes stretched as far as the eye could see. They spent their days exploring, swimming, and talking about everything and nothing. In each conversation, Adrian felt his love for Isla deepen. She was more than just a woman he loved. She was his confidant, his partner, his home. On their last night on the island, the sky was painted with shades of pink and orange as the sun began to set. Adrian led Isla down a quiet path, a secluded part of the beach where the only sound was the gentle crash of the waves. He stopped her near a small fire pit where candles flickered around them, casting soft light over her face. Isla looked at him, her heart already racing, sensing something was different about tonight. She had never felt so alive, so fully herself, than when she was with him. Adrian turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Isla," he began, his voice deep and steady, but there was an unmistakable vulnerability in it. "From the moment I met you, everything changed. You showed me that love is more than just a feeling. It's a choice. It's a promise. And I want to promise you forever." Her breath caught in her throat, her eyes brimming with tears because she had never known a love like this. The way Adrian looked at her, it was as though he saw into her soul, saw everything she was and everything she had been, and still, he chose her. With a soft gasp, she watched as Adrian knelt before her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Isla," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me?" For a moment, everything around them seemed to fade, the world, the waves, the sunset, until there was only Adrian, the man who had become her world. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was all the confirmation Adrian needed. Yes. Though the proposal was a turning point, life had a way of challenging even the strongest bonds. Adrian and Isla returned to the city, where the pressures of the outside world soon began to test their love. As Adrian's family continued to scrutinize his relationship with Isla, the couple was forced to confront the fact that not everyone was as thrilled about their union as they were. Adrian's family, particularly his mother, who had always expected him to marry someone of his own status, was disappointed by his decision. They didn't understand Isla's background, and they couldn't fathom why Adrian would choose her over a woman of his own social standing. Isla, on the other hand, felt like an outsider, even though Adrian constantly reassured her. She struggled with the idea of being judged for things that were beyond her control, things like her past, her poverty, and her status. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner with Adrian's family, Isla found herself sitting alone on the balcony of their penthouse, staring out at the city lights below. Her thoughts were overwhelming, and the doubt that had been simmering beneath the surface bubbled up. "What if I'm not good enough for him?" she whispered to herself. "What if I can't live up to his world?" Her tears fell silently, unnoticed by Adrian, who had come to find her. He approached her carefully, sensing her emotional turmoil. "Isla," he said, his voice gentle but filled with concern. "What's going on in that beautiful mind of yours?" She turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared, Adrian. Scared that I'm not enough for you, that your family, your world, they'll never accept me." Adrian walked over to her, cupping her face in his hands, and kissed her softly, his lips lingering on hers. "Isla," he said, pulling back to look into her eyes, "you are everything to me. I don't care what anyone thinks. All that matters is that you and I are together, and no one can take that from us." His words were like a balm to her wounded heart, and she finally allowed herself to let go of the fear. "I love you, Adrian." "And I love you," he replied. "Together, we can face anything." As the months passed, Adrian and Isla's love only grew stronger. They faced challenges, yes, but they tackled them together, side by side. Their bond was unbreakable, forged in the fires of doubt, fear, and ultimately, trust. They got married in a small, intimate ceremony, a reflection of their simple, deep love. There were no extravagant celebrations or media frenzy. It was just them, surrounded by the people who truly mattered. And from that day on, Adrian knew that Isla was his heart. The world could try to tear them apart, but nothing could ever break the bond they shared. Together, they were unstoppable.